Imagine waking up on March 31st, 2026.
Right, just a normal Tuesday.
Exactly. You check your phone over coffee, fully expecting to see the usual bank closures and, social media posts celebrating a national state holiday.
Like you always do.
Yeah, but instead you see live helicopter footage of cranes quietly dismantling bronze statues from public parks.
Oh.
You see news anchors visibly stunned, like really shaken, reading a desperate, heart-wrenching letter from a civil rights icon that is currently trending worldwide.
It's just jarring.
It really is. Within hours, schools are frantically covering up their own signage. Overnight, you are basically watching an American saint become a historical pariah.
It is a breathtaking collapse. I mean, you are looking at a legacy that felt permanently etched into the bedrock of American history. He was celebrated by presidents, literally stamped onto the U.S. postage system, and then in the blink of an eye, it's just gone.
The man at the center of this historical whiplash and the subject of today's deep dive into the sources is Cesar Chavez. For decades, he was the unquestioned face of the fight for farm workers' rights. But the source material we have stacked up today, which includes a massively updated biographical profile, reveals a story that is so layered, so contradictory, and eventually so dark that it demands a complete reevaluation of everything we thought we knew.
It absolutely does.
Our mission today is to trace his incredible rise, understand the deeply complex methods he used to build his movement, and confront the staggering 2026 revelations that brought it all crashing down. Okay, let's unpack this, because to make sense of how it ended, we really need to look at the specific type of power he was trying to build from the very beginning.
Exactly. And his relationship with power begins with a really profound experience of powerlessness.
How so?
Well, if we go back to his childhood in Arizona, there is a defining trauma. In 1939, during the Great Depression, the local government auctioned off his grandmother's farmstead over unpaid taxes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, his family lost literally everything they had.
Right, and that forces them into this massive wave of migrants heading to California.
Yeah.
The sources describe them living in incredibly bleak conditions. Like, at one point, staying in a cramped, freezing garage in San Jose.
Oh, it was brutal.
They are moving constantly to pick avocados or peas and dealing with intense anti-Latino prejudice from the local establishments. It sounds like an incredibly destabilizing way to grow up.
It was, and it became the psychological anchor of his entire life. Chavez didn't just view the loss of his family's farm as a run of bad luck.
He took it personally.
He internalized it completely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, he saw the banks, the lawyers, the local politicians, the entire Anglo-American establishment as a malicious force that had robbed his family.
Right.
That instilled a permanent, deep-seated distrust of any formal power structure that he didn't personally control.
Which makes his early career trajectory so fascinating. He serves in the Navy, gets an honorable discharge, and then finds his way into community organizing.
Through the CSO, right?
Yeah, the Community Service Organization.
Mm-hmm.
And reading through these sources, I mean, he was a natural. He's setting up chapters, registering voters, and fighting back against the illegal replacement of local workers by the Mexican guest workers.
He was incredibly driven.
By all accounts, he's doing great, impactful work.
He was highly effective. But the CSO was fundamentally a middle-class organization. They were focused on civic integration, on making their members comfortable within the existing American system.
Because against everything he believed.
Exactly. For Chavez, who had that deep distrust we just talked about, this became a massive point of friction.
I read that in 1962, he actually leaves his secure, paid job at the CSO to start the National Farm Workers Association from total scratch.
He did, alongside his lifelong ally, Dolores Huerta.
And I have to say, looking at it purely from the outside, it sounds like the ultimate selfless act. He gives up his own financial security with a large family to fight for the absolute poorest workers in the fields.
You would certainly think so, and that is the narrative that was built around him for decades.
Right.
But if we look closer at his correspondence and his actions from that time, it wasn't just about altruism, it was heavily about control.
How do you mean?
Well, he hated the CSO's middle-class values because, influenced heavily by his Catholic faith, he had come to view poverty not just as an economic condition, but as a source of moral purity.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, he didn't just want to negotiate better wages. He wanted to lead a righteous crusade.
That makes a lot of sense. It's almost like looking at a modern founder who leaves a stable, high-paying corporate job because they would rather own 100% of a starving, struggling startup than be a minor player in a profitable giant.
That is a perfect way to look at it. He needed a movement shaped entirely in his own image.
He needed to be the one steering the ship.
Exactly. And that grassroots organizing phase was the crucible that set up the defining conflict of his life, the event that would make him a household name.
The 1965 Delano grape strike.
Right.
Now, one of the most surprising facts in our source material is that Cesar Chavez didn't actually start this massive historic strike.
That's a crucial detail that gets erased in a lot of the myth-making. The strike was actually initiated by Filipino-American farm workers, led by a brilliant organizer named Larry Itliong.
They were the ones who initially walked out, right?
Yes, they demanded wages equal to the federal minimum wage. Chavez and his largely Mexican-American followers actually voted to join Itliong's strike a few days later.
And when they emerged to form the United Farm Workers, the UFW, this is where Chavez's sheer brilliance as a tactician takes over.
It really does.
He doesn't just run a standard labor dispute with picket lines and contract demands. He completely changes the language of the strike.
He does. Because he understood that a traditional strike by impoverished workers against multi-million-dollar agricultural growers was basically a losing battle.
Yeah, the growers had all the leverage.
They had the police, the courts, the money. To win, Chavez needed the American public on his side, so he utilized something called liberation theology.
I saw that term in the sources. Can you break down exactly how that functioned on the ground during the strike?
Absolutely. So, liberation theology is essentially a fusion of Christian theology with social activism. It frames the struggle for social justice not just as a political goal, but as a divine mandate.
Making it a holy war, almost.
In a way, yeah. Christ is seen as a liberator of the oppressed. So Chavez took the mechanics of a labor strike and dressed them in the deep, resonant Catholic symbolism of his workers.
And you see this incredibly vividly in the 300-mile march he organized to the state capitol in Sacramento.
The pilgrimage.
Yeah, he didn't call it a protest march. He officially framed it as a pilgrimage of penance. Picture this: hundreds of farm workers walking under the blistering California sun, their feet covered in blisters, carrying massive banners of the Virgin of Guadalupe and wooden crucifixes.
It's powerful imagery.
It completely bypassed the standard political arguments and went straight for the moral conscience of the country.
It was highly theatrical, but it was also deeply culturally authentic to the workers. And then he escalated it.
Right, in 1968.
Yeah, the strike was struggling, and some workers were advocating for violence. To regain control and refocus the movement on nonviolence, Chavez stops eating.
The famous 25-day fast. He loses over 30 pounds, he is bedridden, and the entire nation's press descends on this small room where he is lying.
Everyone was watching.
And it culminates with him finally breaking bread alongside Senator Robert F. Kennedy. It's an undeniable public relations masterpiece. By 1970, the massive Delano growers actually cave. They sign contracts with the union.
He achieved what people thought was impossible. He brought the titans of California agriculture to their knees without firing a single shot.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, looking at the physical reality of the man. The sources detail the immense physical toll this took.
It ruined his body.
Yeah, he had fused vertebrae, chronic, agonizing back pain, and he often had to walk with a cane. And you have to wonder, was he genuinely enduring this immense physical suffering as a pure act of Catholic faith, or was he brilliantly weaponizing his own pain to guilt his opponents and, maybe more importantly, to demand absolute loyalty from his followers?
The sources indicate it was a complex blend of both, but the latter became increasingly dominant. He was studying Mahatma Gandhi, who frequently used fasting to assert moral authority.
Right.
Chavez explicitly began to view himself as a messianic figure. He genuinely believed that his personal suffering ennobled the cause and essentially washed away the sins of the Union.
But there's a danger to that, isn't there?
A huge danger. The flip side of adopting a messianic persona is that you begin to view any challenge to your authority not just as a disagreement, but as a heresy.
And that leads us right to the 1970s, where the narrative of the noble civil rights leader takes a very sharp, very dark turn toward outright authoritarianism.
There's a drastic shift.
As the union grows and the pressure mounts, his leadership style completely fractures. He physically isolates himself. He moves the UFW headquarters away from the farm workers in the valleys, up into a remote, abandoned tuberculosis sanatorium in the mountains.
A compound called La Paz.
Yeah. And he has the perimeter guarded by armed patrols at night.
The immense pressure of maintaining this saintly, infallible image had deeply affected his psyche. He became consumed by paranoia.
Believing people were out to get him.
Exactly. He convinced himself that the Union was infiltrated by saboteurs and spies who were actively plotting to destroy him.
So he initiates these massive Mao-inspired purges. He starts rooting out anyone who asks questions or pushes back on his decisions.
Even his closest allies.
Yeah, he forces out Larry Elyung, the man who actually started the Delano strike. He purges long-time, incredibly loyal volunteers, and he surrounds himself completely with yes-men.
It was a total echo chamber.
But the most alarming part of this era is his obsession with a group called Synanon.
Yes. To understand this, we really have to look at what Synanon was. In the 1960s and 70s, Synanon started as a radical drug rehabilitation program in California.
Okay.
But over time, it morphed into the human potential movement and ultimately devolved into a violent authoritarian cult. Its founder, Charles Dederich, pioneered aggressive behavioral modification techniques.
And Chavez was drawn to that.
He was fascinated by how Dederich controlled his followers.
The sources say Chavez actually takes his executive board to the Synanon compound to observe, and then he brings their methods back to La Paz. He mandates that his union leaders participate in something called the game.
Yes, the game.
And the descriptions of this in the sources are just chilling. It's this mandatory, profanity-laced group therapy session. It would put one person in the center of the room, and everyone else would scream at them, hurl vicious, deeply personal criticisms, and aggressively break down their psyche.
And nobody was allowed to leave.
To me, it sounds like an autoimmune disease. It's like the Union's psychological immune system went into hyperdrive, attacking its own healthy tissue, its most loyal allies, just to protect the host, Chavez. Like a deeply toxic corporate retreat or some kind of cult indoctrination.
That is exactly how it functioned. And what's fascinating here is understanding why he thought this was necessary.
Why subject his friends to that?
Well, Chavez wasn't just reading Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. He was simultaneously studying Niccolo Machiavelli and Adolf Hitler.
Wow.
He was analyzing the cold, hard mechanics of mass control. He fundamentally believed that a democratic union would be too weak to survive the growers.
He thought democracy was a liability.
Precisely. He believed the movement required unquestioned, absolute authority centralized in him. The game was a deliberate tool designed to shatter independent thought, break down individual egos, and forge trauma-bonded loyalty.
But that level of paranoia and need for total control couldn't just be contained within the fences of La Paz. It bled out into how he ran the Union publicly, leading to some of the most shocking contradictions in the source material.
It really damaged their public efforts.
We get into the late 1970s and 1980s, and the UFW is in free fall. Membership is plummeting. They were losing contracts to the Teamsters, and strikes are failing. And Chavez places the blame for all of this squarely on illegal immigration.
Right. He argued that growers were deliberately bringing in undocumented migrants from Mexico to cross the picket lines and break his strikes.
Which leads to the Illegals campaign. He actually directs his union staff to identify undocumented workers and report them to the government for deportation.
It was highly controversial even then.
And it goes way beyond just making phone calls. He essentially endorses and funds a makeshift border patrol operation run by his own cousin, Manuel Chavez. They called it the Wet Line.
And the details of that are hard to read.
The reports of what happened on this line are horrific. The sources detail accounts of severe violence, migrants being brutally beaten with chains, robbed, and in one gruesome documented case, a man was castrated to deter others from crossing into the U.S.
And when journalists and human rights advocates reported on this violence, Chavez publicly defended his cousin and dismissed the reports as smears orchestrated by paid provocateurs.
And the contradictions just keep compounding. Later in his life, when the Union is essentially financially broken, he pivots to real estate development.
A huge pivot.
He starts building custom homes and strip malls to generate revenue for his organization. And he builds them using non-unionized construction laborers.
It's quite the irony.
I was reading this and just stunned. How does a labor leader who spent his life fighting for the poorest workers justify running a violent border patrol against desperate migrants and then use non-union labor to build strip malls? How did his supporters make sense of this?
To understand it, we have to look at it impartially, strictly through the lens of his own internal logic. Chavez did not operate on broad, consistent ideological principles.
Okay, so what drove him?
He operated on ruthless pragmatism. He viewed the entire world purely in terms of what benefited the United Farm Workers, which meant what benefited him at any given exact moment.
I see.
If undocumented workers were crossing a picket line, they were the enemy to be stopped by any means necessary. If he needed to build a strip mall cheaply to keep his organization afloat, then solidarity with the carpenters' union simply didn't matter.
The rules didn't apply to him.
The ends always justified the means, because he alone was the one defining the righteous ends.
For decades, historians and labor activists debated these specific leadership failures. It was acknowledged that he was a very tough, often autocratic boss who made questionable pragmatic choices.
That was the accepted historical debate.
Right, but absolutely nothing in the historical record could have prepared the public for the explosive secrets that were finally revealed in March of 2026.
It was the definitive shattering of the myth, the moment where the saint was irreversibly dismantled.
It started with a massive, rigorously sourced investigation published by the New York Times. The reporters revealed that Cesar Chavez had systematically sexually abused two adolescent girls on a regular basis between 1972 and 1977, right at the height of his power at La Paz.
The cultural shockwaves from that single article were unprecedented.
Unbelievable.
But the truly devastating blow, the one that ended the legacy permanently, came the very next morning from the last person anyone expected.
Dolores Huerta,
Yes.
the co-founder of the movement, the woman who stood beside him for decades. She published a statement on Medium, and it is a harrowing document.
It is incredibly difficult to read.
She revealed that Chavez had sexually assaulted her on 2 separate occasions, stating explicitly that at least one of those assaults was rape. Both of those assaults resulted in pregnancies, which she carried to term.
And this wasn't just an allegation.
No. The New York Times independently confirmed the paternity with DNA evidence. Alongside the sexual violence, she detailed years of severe emotional abuse, describing how he would scream at her, demean her, and call her a stupid bitch during closed-door union executive board meetings.
And the most profound part of her statement was when she addressed the silence. She explained why this stayed hidden for half a century.
Why did they keep it quiet?
She admitted that she and many others in the inner circle were terrified, not just of him, but of what the truth would do. They believed that if they exposed his crimes, it would completely destroy the farm workers' movement they had bled for.
The fallout was immediate and absolute. Within 48 hours, celebrations nationwide were abruptly canceled. The California Museum physically removed his name from the state's Hall of Fame.
The statues came down?
Statues were quietly taken down under the cover of night. And the state legislature fast-tracked a bill to change the March 31st public holiday from Cesar Chavez Day to simply Farm Workers Day.
A total erasure.
So what does this all mean? How are we supposed to process the grim reality that the very people who built this movement alongside him, the people fighting for human dignity in the fields, were the ones paying the darkest, most agonizing price behind closed doors just to maintain his power?
This raises an important question, and it's the core tragedy of this entire history. It exposes the profound danger of building any social movement around a single, unquestionable saint.
Because they become untouchable.
Exactly. When a righteous cause becomes entirely synonymous with one charismatic leader, the people around him, his enablers, and tragically, his victims feel trapped.
It's that terrible calculus we had talked about.
Yes. They're forced into believing that holding the man accountable for his abuses is the same thing as destroying the cause itself. His carefully crafted messianic image didn't just inspire the public, it functioned as an impenetrable shield that allowed his abuse to continue unchecked for decades.
It leaves us with an incredibly difficult duality. On one hand, Cesar Chavez undeniably brought national awareness to some of America's most marginalized workers.
He did.
He utilized brilliant tactics to force powerful growers to the table and won tangible victories that changed lives. But on the other hand, he was an autocrat who psychologically, emotionally, and physically abused the very people who trusted him the most, demanding absolute penance from everyone but himself.
The history we get is rarely the history that actually happened behind the gates.
Exactly. And it leaves you with a deeply unsettling thought to walk away with. If the farm workers movement had been built as a true, transparent democracy from the start, rather than a cult of personalities centered on one man's manufactured saintliness, how many victims could have been spared?
It's a haunting question.
And it makes you look around and wonder what other historical heroes whose statues we walk past every single day are currently being protected by the silence of those who are simply too afraid to damage a righteous cause. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the histories you've been taught, and we will see you next time.